Hello again and welcome. This is Dr. Chairs. We are back again. I actually just showed you one of the games that was played at the NextGen Cup tournament, which was played between a number of African players in the diaspora. So I actually showed us the game between Zimbabwe, Farai Mandiza, and the Nigerian Tunde Onokoya. So what I decided to do is to try to put all the remaining games in the video. So if you're looking at this video and you might discover it's kind of long, just you could just skip forward to try to check the other games. If you don't want, if you see a little part of this game, you want to go to the next game, just fast forward and then you're going to be able to check the other games. So the game I have for us today, right now, the game I have for us now is the game between Tani Tolua and Goodness Ekunke. These are very young masters, strong players, and this was still in the first round of the generation next gen. So let us see how this game went. Tani was on the white side. He started with the move e4. C5. This is Solian defense by Goodness. And knight to f3 is played. We have knight to c6. Bishop to b5. I think this is what we call the Rosolimo attack. Yes, this is the Rosolimo attack. Sometimes we can get the position when black plays d6. For example, in this position, if black plays a move d6, bishop b5, this is still also, we call this the Rosolimo. But in this situation, here, after the move knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, e6, bishop captures, black captures back. Now, the idea of the bishop takes, b takes is to try to force black into a very uncomfortable pawn structure. Now, if you're not careful, you can get a lost position very, very quickly. So the idea is giving up the bishop to force the pawns in a very awkward position and then try to find a way to exploit those pawns disadvantage. So this takes b3 is played, d5, e5. Now black has this pawn structure that is looking so-so. Why do I say that? The c6, d5, and e6 are looking good. With the pawn on c5, this bishop is going to be restricted. And, you don't want to push this pawn right now because you don't want to have to capture back with a pawn because then this pawn becomes a weak pawn. And then they're not just looking good. And of course, it's going to give you 1, 2, and 3 pawn islands. These are things you want to avoid anytime you're playing, especially when you're on the end game. So the move b3 is played. After the move b3, b3, d5, e5. This pawn move is a very important move. It's a very interesting move at the same time because now it stops the knight from the natural square f6. It puts a lot of pressure on the dark squares around the king's position, around black's position. So black really has to find a way to do something about this pawn. And of course, with the pawn on e5, bishop on b2 is going to be interesting because that means you really can't make a move like f6 because it's going to bring this bishop into the game. And of course, looking at this position, it's kind of like a close position. So when you have a close position, you always want to have a knight. And of course, when you have open positions, you always want to have a bishop. So knight e7 is played. White plays d3. Knight to g6. White plays h4. Now, h4 idea of the h4 is to dislodge this knight. Knight is going to look pretty good on g6. At least it puts pressure on e5, puts pressure on f4. So if we can get h5 in, this knight would have to go back to e7. And by going back to e7, you're going to disturb the development of a bishop on g7. So, excuse me, h4 is played, and knight goes back immediately. And then we have h5. So what exactly is white doing right here? Like I said, when the bishop went to b5 to capture c6, white is looking for a positional struggle. He's not looking for a knockout game where he just takes black out with one kind of attack. But he's looking pretty much for a very positional struggle. Now, the pawn on h5 causes a lot of restriction in black's territory. For example, you cannot play g6 because after captures, if you capture back, now this becomes a backward pawn. I have the knight to g5 where I can use either the square g5 with my knight or with the bishop. And then I can also have the bishop to f6. So this looks very okay for white pieces. And of course, black is going to have a lot of problem with this king on the E8 square. Right now, maybe not thing to be worried about because the center is closed. But eventually, the longer the king stays on that part of the board, the more problem the king can face. So H5 is played. We have H6 stopping the advance. After the move H6, C4. Now, C4 wasn't really the best move in this position for white. But it looks kind of good for me because by moving the pawn to c4, you're making sure this pawn just remain there forever. And of course, this bishop is really going to have nothing to do in this position because after the move c4, you have this very nice pawn chain that there's really nothing black can do about that. And of course, you don't want to play d4, then you give up the e4 square where white can just put a lot of pressure on the dark squares. So, but instead of the move c4, knight c3 is actually a move recommended by the engine. But hey, there's a reason why we're not engines. c4 is played. We have knight goes to f5, keeping an eye on the d4 square. Knight goes to c3. Knight goes to d4. Now, we don't want to take the knight because taking opens up the bishop and then we can play c5. All of a sudden, black is back in the game. But knight d4 is played here. And actually, bishop e7 would have been the better move. Just bishop, just keep developing your pieces. So knight d4 is played. We have knight to a4, putting pressure on the pawn on c5. We have possibilities of coming to attack that pawn in the future. We have this, we have that. Of course, we don't want to take right now because our king is still exposed. We don't want any queen check win material. So knight a4 is played. We have queen goes to c7. Bishop goes to b2, threatening to win a pawn. Really? Yeah, maybe. Bishop goes to b2, a6. Wow, what a move. A6. Now, why in the world would you want to play a6 in this position? What is the point of a6? Because by playing a6, you're pretty much just shutting your bishop off. A6, I really don't know why. Maybe, I don't know if it was a sleep, I don't know. Because a6 doesn't really achieve anything here. So a6 is played. We have castles. Now white castles. White is in the driver's seat. White position is looking really, really good. And white is so, like I said, it's such a positional game. Now, if black doesn't do something about this knight, it's going to get captured. And then white wins a pawn. We have situations like rook to e1, take, and white is just looking very good. So here we have bishop goes to e7, rook to c1, getting all the pieces on the best squares possible. Castles, knight takes back, bishop takes, wins a pawn, white wins a pawn. Rook to b8, we have queen to f3, and the threat is simply to take on d5. If you take back, I take back here, and then if you take back, I win a piece. Well, I get my queen back, pressure on your bishop, you're already a pawn up, you're going to be 2 pawns down. And you're already a pawn down, you're going to be 2 pawns down, and that's not going to look good for you. And of course, you still have to figure out what are you going to do with the bishop on c8. It's interesting how this bishop on c8 is plaguing everyone. The last game also, black had a bishop on c, that was really a big problem. So queen to a5, getting away from the possible take, and exploiting the pin on the c file. And so we have queen to d2. What's the point of queen to d2? Bishop b6 is possible, but nothing much. Probably just improving the position, defending the bishop, stopping the advance of the pawn. So we have f5. Now, in the game of chess, when you have cramped, you tend to want to lash out. You want to try and get something done. You don't want to just sit there, and you want to get something done. And I mentioned something earlier about this f push, because when you push that pawn, you're going to have to worry about the bishop of that diagonal. So after the move f5, captures back, bishop goes to b6, attacking the queen. The rook has to take. Now, why is that? You cannot come here because then I have bishop here. Sorry, is that the right move? Yes, bishop c5, and then this is just really bad it's already bad for black anyway. So instead, after the bishop to b6, takes with the queen goes to to d2. Now, anytime you're up material, of course, you want to try to exchange as many pieces as possible. anytime you're down material. I mean, anytime you're up material, you'd want to exchange pieces as possible because the more pieces you exchange, the clearer the board gets, the easier it is for you to convert your advantage. So takes on c4, takes on d5, c takes on d5, takes back, queen takes on c6, queen takes a2, queen goes to e to d6. What's the threat here? What is black? What is white threatening here? I'm not sure. I would have taken the pawn check, but there's a reason it went to the d6 square. Probably, oh, yes. Rook takes c8, rook takes back, queen check, wins material. So that threat has to be stopped. Bishop goes to g4. Queen takes check, king goes to h8, knight goes to c3, gaining tempo on the queen, and also the idea of knight to e4 is possible, putting pressure on the bishop. Now, if knight takes rook, if rook takes, rook check is going to be very strong. And if pawn takes, rook goes to the 7th rank, it's going to be very strong. Already, game is pretty much done. Black is just trying to do whatever he can to see how long this game is going to go. So, queen goes to b2, we have knight to e4, bishop goes to e2, attacking the rook. Rook goes to e1, putting pressure on the bishop. Bishop goes to g4. We have knight takes f6. We have queen takes f6. We have f3, forcing the bishop away from getting into anywhere in white's position. And, you cannot go to d7. You only have to come to c8. But even then, you're an exchange down. You're a couple of pawns down. At this point, goodness, threw in the towel. So we're going to go right to the next game. We're going to go right to the next game. So the next game we have is between Justus Williams and the great Watu Kobese. Justus Williams. Justus was on the white side here. So the game started with the move knight f3. Justus always likes to move the knight to f3. Justus is more of a positioner player, very solid player as well. And I think Justus already has 2 GM norms, if I'm not mistaken, either 1 or 2 GM norms. So knight f3 is played, d5. And also I remember playing Justus at the Charlotte, the US Masters last year, the first round. I think I played him in a game. He made a blunder, and I was able to win a pawn. But he had a lot of counter play, and I really couldn't convert, and we agreed a draw. So knight f3, d5, e3, knight to f6, c4, e6. This is a very interesting setup for whites. White just kind of takes his time to see how black plays its pieces before he actually starts to come up with what plan he's going to make. And there are several ways you can get to this. You can start the game with the knight f3. You can actually start with also c4. We have some players in Nigeria that employ this kind of opening. So knight c3 is played. Bishop to e7, b3. Very quiet play. Very quiet but very deceptive. Quiet and deceptive. If you're not careful, you could run into a lost position very quickly with players that play such opening. So b3 is played, castles, bishop to b2, getting the bishop to a very good diagonal. Bishop to b2, we have c5. Of course, black wants to try to put the knight on c6 to start to fight for the central square. c5 is played, now captures back. We have rook to c1. It's interesting that white is just about getting all these pieces on the queen side before even doing anything about the king side. So, of course, he knows what the opening is, and sometimes people play things to avoid preparation. So, rook to c1 is played. We have knight to c6, knight to a4, putting pressure on the pawn of c5. Now, there's a lot of questions that's going to be asked there. Let us see if white will be able to, black will be able to answer as many questions as possible. So b6 is played, bishop to b5, every move is a threat. Bishop has to go to b7, d4, every move is a threat. I like this. Now it's threatening to take his win a pawn. Let's see what happens. a6 is played, bishop captures back, pawn captures. Interesting move. Pawn captures. D takes e5, bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, castles. So let us check out this game and see what exactly is going on. Um, Black has an isolated pawn on d5. White has two isolated pawns on a4 and a2. Black has three pawn islands, one, two, three. White has two pawn islands, one, two. And White has a very strong bishop. I like this bishop on b2. It cuts right into the middle of the board all the way to White's position. So this bishop is going to cause some problem for White, for the black pieces. And of course, the knight is also looking very good. Now, there are very several moves White can adopt here. Actually, the last move played was castle long. The immediate threat is bishop takes d f6, followed by queen takes d5. Of course, you kind of capture the g pawn. I mean, you're just going to get crushed on the g file. So knight to e4, that threat was taken care of immediately. Queen to b3. What's the point of queen to b3? Number one, vacating the background, connecting the rooks, putting pressure on the d5 pawn. The rook is going to come to d1, put pressure on the d5 pawn. And in some situations, we actually have a move like this. I don't know if we want to make that move right now or not, but queen to b3 is played. We have queen to d7, rook f to d1, rook f to d8, rook to d3. White has a very simple plan here. Just put pressure on this d pawn and try to capture it. That's all. Just put as much pressure as possible on the d pawn. By putting pressure on the d pawn, black will tend to get all these pieces to defend the d pawn. And in so doing, white can try to find a way to create some play on another side of the board. So rook d3 is played. We have b5, a5. Actually, that's interesting move by that's an interesting move by. I think no, it doesn't. It doesn't win. I was thinking about rook takes, knight takes, queen here, but it just plays this, and then we don't have anything. So let's go back. But I think it's very important white captures the pawn on b5, because by putting the pawn on a5, it becomes a weakness that black can always go to capture. So after the move b5, white plays a5, which is not a good move, and knight e5 was actually a better move. So a5, queen to g3. That was a blunder by by black. That was a blunder. Did black have something better? Bishop f8 was a very good move. Defending the weak pawn on g7 thanks to the bishop on b2, and then threatening moves like knight to c5, putting pressure on the queen and the rook. And of course, this pawn, I don't really know. That pawn there, I don't know. So queen to g4 was played. Rook takes d5, loses a pawn. Yeah, that move just loses a pawn for nothing. Think about that. Rook takes d5, and after this, everything changes. I'm sure Watson must have missed that. Rook takes h6 is played. h3. We have queen to g6, threatening nothing much. Who now wins an exchange, now wins a piece. What must have missed that also. So knight takes, rook takes, queen goes to e6, queen captures back, rook goes to c7, and it's going to be very hard, very, very hard to get this rook off the seventh rank. With the bishop attacking and the possibility of the knight to join, the end is really, really near for the black pieces. So we have rook check, we have king to h2, we have rook to b1, attacking the bishop on b2, we have rook takes check, king goes to f8, we have bishop to e5. Now, white has possibilities of knight to h4 with either this check. You can either pick up the rook, and I'm sure there are also possibilities of checkmate because this king doesn't really have any squares to go to. So we have rook goes to the d8 square, trying to activate the rook. Now we have knight to d4, threatening to just win an exchange. I don't think that's going to be easy to stop. So rook goes to d5, attacking the bishop. We have knight takes check. King has to move. We have knight check. And after the knight check, the black loses the rook for free. And then this game is just pretty much over. So this was the game between Justice William and Watson Kope. So the game started very interestingly, but things went really bad for Black quickly. especially with the fact of black having to defend the d5 pawn. Anytime you have a weakness, it's really hard. More pressure is just going to make sure you really have to find a way to defend that weakness. And if you can't, that might be the drawback of the game, of the position. And let's check the next game. The next game we have is the game between Orlando. Oh my God, I forgot to mention Orlando in my introduction. Orlando is from Barbados. Orlando Osborne is from Barbados. He's an international master, very strong player as well. And yes, apologies for that. I forgot to mention Orlando in my intro. I knew I was missing someone. So Orlando had the white pieces here against the Nigerian national champion Tessie Ferdinand. So let's see how this game went. We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, the Scotch opening, captures, bishop to c4. Yeah, this is a very popular line, sacks a pawn for activity. He plays knight to f6, e5 has to be played, d5 is the right move. We have bishop to b5, trying to win the pawn back on d4. He says knight to e4, knight takes, trying to get his pawn back. He says, I'm going to play bishop to d7. You get your pawn back, but I'm not going to let you get a piece. I'm not going to let you get my knight and the pawn and the rook and all that. So he says, well, I'm going to do bishop takes. He takes back with the pawn, white castles. He plays bishop to c5, putting pressure on the knight on d4. He plays f3. I really dread to make him move like this, but really nothing to be worried about because the knight on d4 cannot be exploited right away. f3 is played. We have knight to g5, f4. These are normal, typical moves in this position. Knight goes back to e4, bishop to e3. Extra protects the knight on d4. We have rook to b1, putting pressure on the weak pawn on b2. We have knight to d2. White says, well, if you want to get my pawn, please be my guest. I don't think it's a pawn I want to capture, especially when the knight can go back and then the rook gets trapped. That's not something we want to indulge in. So knight takes d2, queen takes d2, castles. We have knight to b3, bishop goes to b6, e4. I actually like white's position here. White's very active. All these pieces are looking really good. And black doesn't really have a lot of activity with his pieces. I would say white has a very slight advantage here. And of course, I would at some point in time tuck this king in because I don't want my king to be on the same color with the bishop. So I'm going to just tuck this king in at some point in time, bring the rook on a to a1 and try to either get the e pawn, e push in or the f6 push in. Any of those two should guarantee white some kind of advantage. So queen goes to f4. What a way to exploit the pin. And I was just mentioning about moving this king away. Maybe didn't really have the time. So queen goes to g5. Very interesting move by Ferdinand. So we have knight d4 threatening to win the queen. Now the queen moves to h5, getting away from the threat. We have f6. I don't know if f6 is the right move in this position. I don't know if f6 is the right move in this position because even after the move f6, yes, black's position might get a little compromised, but I don't know if you could force this queen away from having to defend the king's position. And of course, after f6, this bishop actually can get a chance of coming into the game. We know what other possibilities. So f6 is played. Queen takes, wow, it drops a pawn just like that. It drops a pawn. From having an advantage to all of a sudden you have to struggle in this game. So it drops a pawn, rook a to e1. Now that's one move I would have played at some point in time. Get all my pieces in the game, and I know good things are going to definitely happen. Rook a to e1. We have rook f to e8. Takes on g. Wow, I really feel white is playing dangerously. Why don't you just play c3? Maybe c3. Maybe I like c3. Making sure this guy is protected as many times. I like C because after c3 you can never play moves like bishop to f4. Or yeah, or just bishop to h6 ready to take after the move c3. Well, this is defended twice. This is defended 3 times. you know But one thing about chess is you're always going to play according to your style. It doesn't matter if that style is, it doesn't matter what the position says. You tend to always want to do what's what your style tells you to do. So taking on G7, I really don't. I'm not a fan of that move because they're not really threatening anything. Actually, the pawn actually helps protect the black king right now. So F6, C5 is played. We have knight goes to B3. Bishop attacks the rook on F1. Bishop takes on C5. Bishop takes check. Knight takes. Queen goes to D6, attacking the knight on what square? Attacking the knight on C5. This is under attack. This is under attack. How do we stop this? Knight goes to D3, just covers up. And let's keep count. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. So white is still an upper pawn, although I don't think it's something white should be really, um, I don't think black should be really worried about that. It's an open position. It has a bishop. So, a lot of things can happen very quickly. So bishop takes, queen takes, giving up the pawn on B2, rook to E6. I think all of a sudden white is okay here again. Rook to E6, B3, rook doubles on the E file, queen to F5. The threat is made on F7 if you get careless. That's if you get careless. Queen check, king goes to H1, queen goes to E7, threatening to take the rook on E1. Why not just move the rook here, put pressure here? Maybe not as good. Anyway, rook takes is done in the game. Queen takes, queen goes to F4, putting pressure on the pawn on C7. And white's going to have to, black doesn't really have to take the pawn on G7 right now. When the queens are off the board, take the pawn and then you're fine. So, but I don't think there's a way white or black can make any headways from this position. I don't really think they can really get anything out of this. So C6 is played. We have H3 trying to create a loft to avoid any kind of back ranks. King captures. Not the best move right now. Not the best move right now. I think it's better to just leave the pawn there as long as possible. Try to get a queen trade or something, try to get a queen trade. Oh, well, you can't, this is always going to be checkmate. Maybe counter rook to E7, maybe. I mean, check, we can always take the pawn, so don't have to worry about that. As long as F7 is defended, I think black should look for ways to get active. So king takes G7 is played. We have queen check, queen takes pawn. I think white is just waiting here. White is just winning here. You have an outside pass pawn that really black has no answer to. White is just pretty much winning here. I don't know how this game ended in a draw. Tessa must have played really well, or Orlando played really badly. So queen takes A7. We have rook attacks the queen. Queen comes back to F2. Queen goes to G5, threatening nothing. Just start pushing your pawn. A4. Queen goes to G6, still not threatening anything. Queen check. King moves. Queen F6. That looks like a forced move because it has to bring the queen here, and then I can take that, right? Yeah, I think so. Oh, he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take. Okay. Patience. Now you're going to start pushing the pawns. But wait a minute. Wait a minute. I'm trying to check something out here. Yeah, just defend the pawn and just start pushing your pawn. That's the way. Rook C1. Pawn push. Pawn push. Rook threatens to get the queen. King moves up. King moves out. This is the winning. Pawn push. King moves out. This is the winning. I don't like that one. I prefer that one. So that after G4, I can play H5 and then I'm just winning. The problem with the move played was, okay, even though after this check, this king move here I can take and still winning. All right. Defend the pawn. How in the world did whites throw this game away? D4, G5, G5. Still winning, but I like H4. Create a pass pawn. Force him to go defend. And then you know, create a pass pawn. G5 is played. King to E5. Wow, still winning, but this is just a little careless. That's my point. Let us, I'm gonna go back here for a minute. Just H4, followed by H5. If it pushes, now it has a pawn blockade. You're gonna capture this, you have 2 points, just winning. Maybe white was down, even if you're down on time, even if you're down on time. I mean, and it's an increment. So G5 is played because what you've done is you've given black a pass pawn. See, black has a pass pawn. So you can't afford to move too far away from this pawn. You can't afford to do that. You know, King E5, pawn push. King comes back to get the pawn push. Checks. Attacks the pawn. Now, if you lose this, he has another pass pawn he can roll with. That's the problem. Now, white is just making a lot of things difficult for himself. Yes, it's still winning, but you don't have all the time in the world to make the right moves to make something happen. So pawn push, king takes, pawn push. Now it's playing h5. Think about that. When you could have created this pass pawn ways back. Takes, pawn push, rook moves, king pawn push. Now you get a queen. This is just bad because the game ends in a draw. You will have to stop this pawn from moving. The king stops the pawn. This was really a careless draw by white. I don't maybe I had some time trouble. I have no clue. So let us move right to the next game. Let us move right to the next game. So we have the last game we have today in this video review is between Joshua Collas and Kenny Solomon. Okay, wow. Okay, Kenny Solomon, Joshua Collas. So, um, knight f3 is played. We have d5, d4, knight f6, g3, the parent to bishop f5, bishop to g2, h6. The idea of h6 is to tuck the bishop in anytime the knight comes to h4 to harass it. So h6 is played. It's always good to invest in that more because the bishop actually has a very strong diagonal. So you want to make sure the bishop maintains that diagonal. So c4 is played by Joshua. e6, white castles, bishop to e7, queen to b3. Because of the fact the bishop is outside the point, you're looking good, but then there's a weakness here. You left undefended. So black has to do something about the weak pawn of b7. Queen c8 is played. Knight to c3. Now black is going to come under a lot of fire because bishop f4 is coming, rook c1 is coming, rook d1 is coming, and this position pretty much just plays itself for white. White has the easier game in this position. Meanwhile, black has to look for every way to make something happen in this game. Another thing we also want to think about is the knight on b8. Where do you want to put the knight? Do you want to bring the knight to c6 after moving the pawn to c5? Do you want to bring the knight to d7? We have to figure out where to put this knight. But even after moving this knight, you still have to come up with a better square to improve the placement of the knight. So, queen c8 is played castles. c6, we have knight to d2. Now, in most of this position, this red kind of position, white's plan is always to play the move e4. Because after the e4 move, his position pretty much comes to life. He has a lot of space. Black still has to worry about so many things. Because now white pieces are freer. They are way freer than normal. So knight d2 is a normal, typical maneuver in this position. So we have knight bd7. We have e4, captures back, castles, bishop to f4, getting all the pieces to the required squares, I would say. So captures back, knight goes to f6, knight to d6. Now in this position, you might be like, well, we're exchanging pieces. Well, think about it. Yes, you're exchanging pieces, but white has more space compared to the black pieces. White has definitely more space. Now, after knight to d6, one bishop is going to be lost. I don't know if that's the best move. Um, I don't know if that's going to be the best move. Knight to c3, you'll probably have to take because you don't want a situation whereby knight takes on f5, you take here, and then you have this double pawn you might have to worry about later on the game. So knight d6 is played, bishop takes back, rook to e8. I'm not sure what the plan is. rook to e8. But for me, it makes sense because now, for example, if you come to the square here, I think probably is worried about this, but nothing's worried about. Take. I mean, just move your bishop back. Queen to d7, rook here, and I think white is going to have a lot of trouble in this situation. So rook to e8 was played. Rook to e8 was played. We have queen to d7, putting pressure on the weak bishop on d6. We have bishop to f4. I would have actually preferred bishop to e5. So bishop to f4 is played. Bishop to f4 is played. Rook to c8. A little mistakes here, and I think the reason is because of the time control. Anytime you play rapid, there are always a lot of mistakes. So rook a c8. Of course, how would you say this is a mistake? You're trying to activate your pieces. Well, like I said earlier, we're not computers, we're not engines. We don't know this stuff. But rook c8 was not the best move based on the engine. So we have rook a d1, getting all your pieces into the game. The rooks are centralized. He has the two bishops. Doesn't guarantee a win, but it guarantees that white is going to be able to put a lot of pressure on black's position. So rook a d1 is played here. We have b5. Now, what's the point of b5? Now, if it takes, it's going to give up the d5 square for the knight, which is going to be very something black will really, really like to do. If black can get the knight with d5, all of a sudden is not as clear. So b5 is played here. We have h3. Stop keeping an eye on the g4 square. g4 is a possibility. King h3 is a possibility in some variations, so that we don't have to get stuck with moving our bishop back anytime the check appears on the back rank. So captures back. Knight goes to d5. Bishop to c1. Of course, we don't want to give up the bishop for the knight, not right now. So queen goes to b7. b3 is played. Knight goes to b4. What's the threat? Pawn on c2. Pawn on a2 is under attack. Excuse me. So rook goes to d2, protecting the pawn. We have knight goes back to d5. I was going to mention that move. I like the bishop to a3. Stops any occupation of b4 and then threatens to just build a house on c5. If we can build a house on c5, this pawn is always going to be under attack. And things can just work a little better for white in this position than the black pieces. So bishop goes to g6. We have king to h3. I mentioned the idea of h3 earlier. The idea is to be able to talk this king in so that we can go crazy if we can. Just pawn push, just keep pushing the pawns, trying to get something to happen. So we have a5 threatening nothing much. Because even if we bring the knight here, we really don't have to take if we don't want to. But let's keep going. Bishop to c5, guaranteeing the fact that this bishop is not going to get blocked by the knight. Bishop to c5 is played. Bishop, rook to a8. Now I said something about f4. f4, what's the point of f4? Of course, trying to push this pawn to harass this bishop. Of course, you can't play g4 right now because this is hanging. So you have to find a way to get this moves in without having to lose the pawn on f4. So we have queen to c7. Say, I'm waiting for you to push that pawn. And of course, he said, no, I don't really plan to push it right away. I'm going to play rook f2. I'm still looking to get this pawn going, and that's going to give black some things to worry about. He plays h5. h5, very good move. The idea is to push this pawn to dent this pawn structure, right? So what does he do? He plays rook to e5. Bad move based on the engine. Collar just made a bad move against GM Kenny. And I'm not sure if Kenny was able to exploit that. Queen c1 would have been a good move here. Why? We want to defend this guy as many times as possible. We don't want to have to move this rook because we already have a rook on the f file. So let there be another rook on the d file, on the e file. So make sure your rooks have possible files they can operate on. You don't want to choke all the rooks on one file that is closed, even if the file is closed right now, so you don't want to choke all your rooks on that file. So queen c1 would have been a better move, but instead rook to e5 was played. Not a good move. f6 is played. Rook takes. Now, that was a blunder based on the engine. And at this point in time, Ken Solomon is just winning. He should have just taken the rook. If bishop takes, queen takes, pawn takes. If queen takes, we have queen to c6. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And then what do you do here? What if you place queen takes c6? Then you really have nothing. So you've given up an exchange. For example, yeah, you've given up an exchange. So queen takes c6, rook takes c6. White is just busted here. You know, white is just busted here. We also have to remember the time control. And that's why, when you're playing rapid, it's very different from playing classical. People tend to make a lot of mistakes when playing rapid. But with classical, you have enough time to think about the moves and get the right move in. Rook takes, bishop moves to f7, not the best move. Bishop takes. White still says, I'm trying to really give this game up. Bishop takes back, rook takes check, takes back, queen to c2. After all this, let's see what's happening here. White has been able to, should I say, um, White has been able to exchange some pieces. So we have how many pawns for black? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for white. But the interesting thing we have to note in this position is they have opposite colored bishops. Most of the time, this game can end in a draw. Now, the only way you can actually have something going for you anytime you find yourself in an opposite colored bishop is if your bishop is the one doing the attacking. Although it's possible for white to create a pass one on the queen side because he has a 2 against 1. But how effective would that be? We're not sure, So, and I still think I still think black has chances here. I don't think black is losing here. So uh, queen goes to c2, rook goes to e4, threatening nothing. So, well, this might be a threat because if you push, rook takes is very strong. I don't know. We have to look into that. So rook goes to e2. It's trying to exchange off the rook. Bishop goes that's a very deadly pin. Rook takes back, queen to queen to d2. Now, I still feel this is very even. Now, how white won this game, I have no clue. I say this is very even. Of course, the time is always a factor. And I'm not sure. At this point in time, white has 2 minutes 21 seconds, while black has 2 minutes 38 seconds. So let's see how this game continues. King goes h7, queen goes to d e2, attacking the h5 pawn. King defends the h5 pawn. Queen goes to b5, threatening the queen check pawn e8. In this situation, white is just pretty much harassing the black king's position. But if you have the black pieces, nothing to be worried about. You have a very strong bishop protecting your pawn on d5. You have the queen protecting the pawn on on a5. Nothing really much to worry about. So, and of course, the bishop cannot move to try to get this pawn because then you're going to be setting yourself up for something called checkmate. So you don't want to do that. So king goes back to h7, queen goes for the exchange of pawns, captures back. Bishop goes for b1. If you get my pawn, I'm going to get your pawn. Bishop goes to c2. If you get my pawn, I'm still going to get your pawn. Takes. Now, white has an OPP. All right, that's an outside pass pawn. White has an OPP. Is it enough to win the game? I really am not sure. I'm not sure. Because if this pawn stays, if the white pawns cannot get the black pawns, and I think the king can just stroll to stop this pawn, I don't think this game is going to end in white's favor based on what I see right now. I don't think white has enough to win this game. But let's see how this game continues. We have king to g2, king to g6, king to f3, king to f5, bishop to b4. We have g6, king to e3, bishop to a4, bishop attacks pawn on f6, king goes to e6, bishop goes to d8, bishop comes to c2. Like I said, I really don't see how white can win this game. Gains a tempo on the bishop. Gets a tempo on the pawn. Pawn push. Bishop comes back to h3. King goes to c3. pawn push. Now, the idea of this pawn push is to make sure bishop takes doesn't work. Now, it's pretty much just going to bring his bishop back, either to c4, bring the king back. And this game is not going to be a win for either party. This game pretty much will end in a draw. Against the tempo, the bishop. Oh, he says, you know what, you can have my bishop. Well, this is the thing. I still think this is still evil. So he takes the bishop, takes the pawn, check, king goes to e6. White all of a sudden has created some opportunities for himself. Bishop goes to f3. That was a blunder. That move right there was a blunder. Bishop c6 would have been a better move. So that when you come here, I can always go there, check you, force you out of my territory. All right. But in this position, bishop f3 was a total blunder. So king goes f6, king goes to d7, captures. You have to come back to defend both pawns. Now I'm going to start pushing my other pawn. Now it's going to be very difficult for black to save this game. You have these two pawns, pass pawns, spaced out against the lone king. Absolute no chance for the king. King goes to c6, pawn goes to a5, king goes to d5. We have a6, takes, pawn push, bishop stops the pawn. We take your pawn. King goes to e3, king goes to g5. Sorry, f4. King goes to d, f2, pawn push. You can't stop these two pawns with this bishop. The king has to go for one, the bishop has to go for the other. And I think it's time for black to throw in the towel because there is no way it's going to be able to stop those two pawns. And after this move, black resigned. And unfortunate loss here for GM Kenny Solomon. He actually, at some point in time, had this in control, but it wasn't meant to be. So those are the games that were in the first round of the next gen cup. And I'm going to definitely come back and show us some of the games that was played in the other rounds. I don't know if we're going to be able to check all the games, but we'll see how it goes. All right. Thank you again for being here. Let's see what you think about the games. See you soon. Take care and God bless. Bye for now.